So anyway, it's a very long name, but basically I'm looking at safeguards. And I would say that the most interesting part here is to compare the quite positive experience between the United States and Soviet Union and see whether it's in fact applicable to today. And we all know that the two countries do share a strong interest in non-proliferation, share very strong interest in safeguards, cooperation between the two countries, the United States, Soviet Union, and now the United States and Russia, on technical safeguards, on the implementation of safeguards have been very consistently strong. Still, the big question, and even if you really look at kind of the evolution of the relationship between the two countries on safeguards, is the big question is whether the shared interest is enough to produce positive outcomes, or you need like additional kind of variables to facilitate that possibility. Even the bottom line really that I can share right away is that yes, the possibility is there, the shared interest is there, but the presence of shared interest is not enough to produce actually cooperation in real life. So what happened during the Cold War? It was truly fascinating of history. I will not tell you, the entire kind of chain of events, but cooperation and safeguards really began in '65 when the Soviet Union finally accepted the principle of one-side inspections. Well, the accept itself, all right, but anyway, so that open discussion about safeguards and inspections by the IAEA in non-nuclear countries. 67, a very big milestone, a joint NPT draft that was submitted by the two countries to the NDC, except for Article 3. That draft contained only a placeholder for Article 3.
You want to just say what Article 3 is?
Safeguards, yes. Sorry. I'm too used to kind of to these kind of things. The main reason why it was a placeholder was the big disagreement over the way safeguards are going to be applied to European countries, and you rather really wanted what some called self-inspection. That Euratom would conclude an agreement with the IAEA as a group and would inspect itself and then report to the IAEA. And that was a big, really, challenge because, already you could implicitly kind of trust European countries to abide by all the rules, but what if similar groups would emerge somewhere else in different parts of the world, and the IAEA would be denied direct access to these countries. The US government was completely split on that. In fact, declassified documents really showed the degree of that split. It was an extremely tough kind of conflict between all agencies that lasted for quite a long time, several years. They continued to argue about 2, 3, maybe years. In the end, the Alliance Solidarity won the day, especially since there was a 58 agreement between US and Euratom, which basically established the US acceptance of the self-inspection kind of rule. But that presented a problem with the Soviet Union. Well, in fact, the Soviet Union during that time, on this issue, did adhere to a very strict non-proliferation criteria. In fact, exactly what Sarah mentioned too, as tough as possible. So in fact, the United States conceding kind of to Western Europe did need to talk the Soviet Union into conceding the strict position on the non-proliferation regime. Yes, and the key role here was really played by diplomats. The consultations in Geneva, daily interaction, trust on a personal level. Basically, key diplomats knew they can trust the counterpart, and if the counterpart said that his country is committed to non-proliferation, well, we can really trust that. That trust extended to a truly interesting kind of thing when the two delegations agreed on the same draft, but the Americans sent it to Washington as the Soviet proposal, and the Soviets sent it to Moscow as an American proposal. As a result, the two capitals did accept that. So that was really kind of paved the way toward agreement on Article 3 and finally the entire non-proliferation treaty. So truly a fascinating kind of diplomatic history here, but also the fact that the Soviet Union did decide to concede on that important point. Was accepting basically that U.S. concerns were valid, and more importantly that we understand you cannot do more, but we understand you really got the commitment and you got your kind of political constraints. A number of other kind of things is, I will not talk about them. Just note, yes, the Zanger group that actually mentioned, a truly interesting kind of story when the Soviet Union did not join the group due to other considerations, but fully supported it and adhered to the same principles. So what's the takeout from that wonderful kind of period? Yes. The Soviet Union did show that it would be prepared to make concessions. So you concede kind of important points, but in the name of the greater kind of good. Shared motivation is absolutely. We trust you, and you trust us, yes, and we can understand your problems. So that kind of point about understanding the constraints of the other side is extremely important, and by the way, something that's lacking today. The important point here that Moscow actually did treat non-proliferation as an isolated issue. Did not allow the influence of other issues on that one. Yes, Washington really could not do that, at least as far as allies came into the picture. Washington did have to juggle these kind of balls. Yes, the Soviet Union just had one ball, and kept to it. That was made possible by the fact that Soviet decision-making was much more concentrated. Then once you make a decision, you just keep going. Small things like the allies don't really affect your decisions. Yeah, that's important thing. Well, yes, it was a bad thing, Warsaw Pact and all stuff like that. But just imagine the Soviet Union would have needed to listen to allies as much as the United States did. Right, that would have made life significantly more challenging. There was an interesting kind of thing about the mode of interaction. The Soviet Union truly loved the experience of NPT negotiations, and decided that in the future all negotiations on non-proliferation should really begin with US-Soviet consultations, and once the two reach agreement, they will present it to everyone else. The United States, in fact, saw that experience not as favorably, yes, and insisted subsequently that it does need to consult allies before actually talking to Moscow. Although, as Secretary London Group, it was not exactly the same mode. Yes, and the United States did actually go to some extent on some issues to the condominium mode. Both really loved international regimes and treaties. Both saw legally binding regimes as vital, central to international security, which did not preclude informal cooperation where kind of necessary. But also very confidential, yes, and I also mentioned negotiators. One kind of thing that I need to mention that's not on the slides is truly going back to declassified materials from 60s and 70s. Yes, I came away in profound shock. I was shocked by the quality of analysis.
Positively.
Yes, positively. Well, negatively in the sense that I do not see the same quality of thought. I cannot see the same brains today that I saw back like of 40, 50 years ago. Yes, that was one big lesson. Yes, and I think that's really very, very profound. That well, it's kind of hard to include into a chapter or something. Yes, let's jump very briefly to the present day. Yes, we still got shared interest. There's been a lot of cooperation, but all of a sudden, the state-level concept in the implementation of safeguards produced a major crisis. Well, basically, the state-level concept was developed by the IAEA just as a way to optimize spending. Zero growth budget. We cannot really expand activities, so let us look at the full track record of each countries and then decide to which countries we will allocate more resources. Initially, both the United States and Russia fully supported the state-level concept. Statements at the Board of Governors were identical, almost to the last word, and then suddenly, 2012, like eruption really, when the Russian delegation said, well, that's all, you know, completely unacceptable. The state-level concept does pave the way toward the IAEA making arbitrary decisions, being the puppet of the West, of the United States, first of all. Non-proliferation is being used by the United States as a pretext for global domination, yes, and recalling the war in Iraq, right? It's the famous vial at the UNSC, and so on and so forth. Plus, the IAEA decided to use other kind of material, open source, national intelligence, and the question was, okay, how much that's going to influence? Yes, and without intelligence, the United States will feed to the IAEA, yes, and why should we trust decisions of the IAEA based on that fake intelligence? So huge, really, conflict, huge scandal that lasted for 2 years. The IAEA produced clarifications, actually twice, so finally kind of satisfied most of the Russian claims. So just 2 years, but why I pay so much attention to that? Well, because it showed completely different parameters of interaction. Almost opposite to what we saw during the Cold War. Now, for both countries, non-proliferation was not an isolated issue. There was just one of a range of issues, yes, could be influenced by other events, other policies. Neither country displayed a strong interest in bilateral channels. Yes, they used to talk all the time and talk confidentially. They don't do that anymore. And they don't want to. They don't try to suppress disagreements. They don't try to limit or to box them. Instead, both countries displayed the propensity to grasp on a disagreement and like expand it, or to make it perhaps even more important than the issue really merited. Informal cooperation was completely out of the question. The interesting thing about the Russian position is that it's now committed to legally binding regimes more even than the Soviet Union, because I think that on paper is something that you can actually cite, and that's the source of your influence, right? The United States, however, especially starting with Bush 43, began to develop a preference for informal regimes like PNIs, for example. I'm sorry. PSI, I'm sorry, yes. So many abbreviations, yes. And Russia, in contrast to the Soviet Union, decided to factor in other countries. It tried to present itself as a defender of quite actually of different countries like Brazil, Argentina, Egypt, Philippines, South Africa, and so on and so forth. So that also changed. So if that's the summary, I will not go through the summary, but just look at that big difference between the Soviet Union and Russia. And quite a bit of difference, like in the United States, although not as much. So the bottom line, the international system has changed, and the role of Russia in that system has changed. And the decision-making mechanism in Russia is very different from that in the Soviet Union. So as a result, even though the two countries continue to share interest in non-proliferation, the parameters, the variables that facilitated that cooperation in the past are no longer present. So we still can cooperate, but it will be much more difficult to achieve that cooperation.
Okay, thank you, Nikolai.